know some things, and the younger we are, the more we know other things. I think the younger you are, the more you know what's happening now. The older you are, the more you know things that are always there. I was reading an article once in the newspaper about some studies that brain scientists were doing about dementia and Alzheimer's, and basically about memory loss in people as we get older. And it was a really fascinating article to me because the theory that they were working on was the idea that there are two kinds of memory loss. One is obviously devolutionary, something's wrong. But the theory was that there's another kind of memory loss that is evolutionary. That what happens in the brain is that when the brain has gotten enough details to recognize a pattern, it does a data dump. So it's not that the person can't remember. It's like when an older person says to a younger one, "Trust me, he's not calling." Right? How does she know? Because she's about 40 years of experience. Right? So I believe that there is a very important issue in terms of our political situation today. Some of it having to do with a youthful, this is the 21st century, you guys aren't even going to be alive when the issue happens whether or not I can breathe. So we get to say. And there's also great value in those who have memories, who are the keeper of the stories, who can say certain things that happened in our lifetime, and who have an experience of the larger historical narrative. And I believe in running for president, actually, I see myself as a kind of bridge. I have a deep sense of American history, a deep sense of the greater historical line having to do with democracy and oppression. The two sides of the American character, both that which is aspirational and enlightened, and also that which from the beginning of our history has stood for some really wicked things. And how we have held that generation to generation, and what has happened when, as always happens, ultimately the democracy wins. But I also know, as someone who is, I'm 67 years old, and also one of the things I know about aging is that after about the age of 50, you kind of decide which road to take. And you can either kind of go along and things go down, or you are actually more rambunctious than ever. Wilder than ever. And you have absolutely no taste for saying it the way you really see it. And that is why I'm running for president. You know, when you go into a court of law, you raise your hand and you take an oath. And you don't just take an oath to tell the truth. You take an oath to tell the whole truth. And nothing but the truth. The conventional politician in America today, there are many of them who are truth tellers. And everybody running for the Democratic nomination, I'm not saying they're not telling the truth, but they're not telling the whole truth.
No.
Right.
And they're not telling nothing but the truth.
No.
Right.
And I don't believe that anything less than the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth is going to be strong enough to create the kind of... Because we have a job on our hands that is as big as the job of any generation before. And we should not hold it as any bit smaller, because it's not. We have a rendezvous with destiny. Those were the terms that Franklin Roosevelt used. When Pearl Harbor had been attacked by the Japanese, he went to Congress. That was when presidents were still following the Constitution and had to get permission from Congress. And he said that our generation, he said, has a rendezvous with destiny. We did not expect it. But the generation of our world, I mean, a crisis is never like convenient. You can never predict it the day before it happened. We didn't expect it. And a lot of what is needed now is that we align ourselves emotionally and psychologically with the fact that this is happening. Because it is that big. And we can't do what we're called to do at this moment in history by saying, okay, well, I have time on Thursday afternoon and I have time on Saturday morning to give to you for the revolution.
Come on.
No. We need a nonviolent revolution in America. John Kennedy said, those who make peaceful revolution impossible make violent revolution inevitable. So we need to show up now so seriously, you know, the way racists and bigots and anti-Semites and homophobes and Islamophobes and xenophobes, these people are serious.
Yeah.
These people are serious and these people are convicted. And conviction is a force multiplier. Way more lovers than haters in America. But the haters are a little more serious about hate. We need to be serious about love.
Amen.
We need to become as convicted behind mercy and justice and compassion and love for each other and love for our children and love for our unborn great-great-grandchildren and love for this earth. We can't, this is not part-time. This is like as serious as it gets, and the forces arrayed against us are as serious as it gets. And it is naive and foolish to think that those forces are just Donald Trump.
Okay.
And if Donald Trump did not create all this created Donald Trump.
Right.
And we have to prosecute a case against more than Donald Trump. We have to prosecute a case against the system that produced him.
That's right.
And the rigging, you know, this is what I've learned running for president. The system is even more corrupt than we feared.
Wow.
And the people of the United States are even more wonderful than we hoped.
Amen.
So let's be clear where the problem lies. The problem does not lie in the consciousness of the people of the United States. We're no better, we're no worse than anybody else, but we're decent people. We're good people. And I think the average American wants to feel like, you know, everybody gets a shot, and we really do. The problem, and it's a big problem, is the gap between the consciousness or the will of the American people and the way our government operates.
Right.
But our government, the corruption of our democracy, is that the government does not now act at the behest of the will of the people so much as it acts at the behest of the huge corporate forces whose money fled Washington, and therefore the advocacy in terms of public policy is more for short-term profits for huge multinational corporations than it is advocacy for us and our health and our safety and our well-being and the health and the safety and well-being of our children and the planet on which we live. Now, we're a country that was founded on the most aspirational, enlightened principles of freedom and liberty that have ever formed the core of a nation. But we all know the irony of the men who signed that document and wrote that document. 41 out of 56 of them were slave owners. So that dichotomy has always been with us. We've always been both. And every generation has always contained both. The anti-democratic principles today are not focused and centered in one evil institution. It's rather an amoral economic mindset that has corrupted our government and it has hijacked our value system. This idea that corporate profits are somehow our bottom line. And it has turned us into people who talk like our country should be run like a business. No, ladies and gentlemen, humanitarian principles and love should be our bottom line, and we should not be run like a business, we should be run like a family.
Yeah.
You run like a business, then all you're going to be serving are those who are useful to the business.
Right.
That means forget the children, forget the old people, forget the sick people. No, 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 no. We need a fundamental and radical power inversion in this country. We the people need to remember who the power is here. We have been trained over the last few decades to say pretty please. We've been trained over the last few decades to expect way too little. Ladies and gentlemen, let's remember, when it comes to the government, they work for us. We do not work for them. Now, this is where it gets gnarlier and gnarlier and gnarlier. Because in order to change the government, we have to change the politics.
Yeah.
And that is even worse than I knew. When the American people voted for Donald Trump, those who did, I am someone who was not shocked. I was as horrified as everyone else, but I wasn't deeply shocked, and I'll tell you why. I had felt for a long time that there was a populist rage of despair that was going to make itself heard. And that despair and that rage are legitimate. People felt this system is rigged, and they were right. And only two candidates spoke to that rage, only two candidates spoke to that despair, only two candidates validated that rage, and that was Bernie Sanders and Donald Trump. I'm not saying Hillary didn't care, I'm saying she didn't name it.
Okay.
And that's everything. Now, what the Democratic establishment did to make the will of the people, and I feel that if the DNC and the Democratic establishment had simply let the people decide who was going to be the nominee, it would have been Hillary, it would have been Bernie, but we all would have shown up because we would have known. And right now, they're doing the same thing. Last time it has to be her, this time it has to be one of these five. And I feel that's a problem, not just for me personally, that's a problem for our democracy, and I'll tell you why. Donald Trump is not just a politician. Donald Trump is a phenomenon. It will not be defeated by just an insider politics game. Democratic candidates are sharpening their knives. Good, guys, you've got plans for this, you've got plans for that. What they don't have is a plan for how to defeat Donald Trump. Because they're sharpening their knives, and the Republicans will be bringing big guns to this battle. Ladies and gentlemen, the only way to defeat Donald Trump, and we need to do more than defeat Donald Trump. If all we do is defeat Donald Trump, those same forces will be back in 22 and they'll be back in 24.
Right.
We need to do more than knock over the cliff. We need to get out of the vicinity of the cliff. And in order to do that, we need to create a phenomenon of our own. And the phenomenon of our own is not an individual. The phenomenon of our own is you wake up and you get what's going on, and you wake up and you get what's going on, and you wake up and you get what's going on, and you wake up and you get what's going on, and all of us remember the most American thing you can possibly say, the most American attitude, the rambunctious spirit that was alive in 1776 and that enabled this country to be formed. And that's when you see a government that is behaving in oppressive ways and you say with full spirit, what the hell is going on here? That's the most American thing you can do. When you see the U.S. government behaving in ways that do not secure the pursuit of the right to the pursuit of happiness for all Americans, let's look at what our Declaration of Independence says. Because our Declaration of Independence is America's mission statement. And we have failed in our time to emotionally and psychologically bond with that mission statement. And if principles are not alive in our hearts, they're dead. They could be on marble walls, they could be written on parchment, but they're not alive in us. They're not alive in us unless every generation says its own, yeah, we mean that too. So let's go over what they are. Because when you get those, and they're not just on marble walls or on parchment, but they're in you, something changes in you.
Right.
Number one, all men are created equal.
And woman.
Well, yes, yeah, women. But I'm just talking about what the words say. And then a generation rises up and says, yeah, and we mean that. God gave all men and women inalienable rights to life, to liberty, and to the pursuit of happiness. It's time for our generation to ask ourselves, do we mean that? Number three, this is where it really gets good. Governments are instituted to secure those rights. That's what government is for. And number four, if government's not doing its job, it is the right of the people to alter it or abolish it. Now, I'm certainly not suggesting we abolish it, but I am suggesting that we alter it. And we must alter it fundamentally. We must alter fundamentally the economic and social and political status quo of this time. The incremental approaches will not do. Changing a policy here, changing a policy there. It's not going to beat Donald Trump because it has no juice to it. It has no imagination to it. has no vision to it, has no serious stuff to it, it will not beat Donald Trump. It will not override it. Only one tower will override what those forces represent. And that is a revolution of love. That is, we're going to change this because we love our planet and we love each other and we love our children and we love democracy. And we're going to do what we would do if you came after one of our kids and we said, stop right there. Right there. Because you know what, ladies and gentlemen, sometimes love says no.
Yeah.
No, love says no. Love is not weak, love is fierce, and love is powerful. And we should not underestimate the power of the forces that are arrayed against real democracy. I don't know how much more you have to see. You got mass incarceration, you got racial disparity in criminal sentencing, you got racial disparity in police engagement, you have a complete lack of moral authority in American foreign policy. You have the United States government, for the sake of $350 billion, giving aerial support to a genocidal war in Yemen, in which tens of thousands of people in Yemen have starved, including children. You have a condition on our planet which is so perilous that if we do not reverse climate change within the next 12 years, it is literally a legitimate question whether or not this species will be able to survive. We have a national security agenda which is based more on short-term profit maximization for defense contractors than it is on proactive waging of peace. You have millions of American children who go to school hungry. You have millions of American children in elementary school asking the teacher, could I please do maybe have something for me to eat? You have millions of American children in classrooms where they don't even have the adequate school supplies to teach a child to read, where if the child cannot learn to read by the age of 8, the chances of high school graduation are drastically diminished and the chances of incarceration are drastically increased. You have 40% of Americans living in chronic economic anxiety, and we continue to pass public policies that give all the opportunities for wealth creation and self-actualization on a material plane to a small group of people at the expense of the many. Ladies and gentlemen, it is time for a generation of Americans to say what the hell is going on, and it is time for us to remember. Abolitionist movement, women's suffragette movement, and the civil rights movement. Three things I want to point out. The government, the political status quo did not wake up one day and say, let us end slavery. No, the people rose up and the people stepped in. The political status quo of that time did not wake up one day and say, we think we should give women the right to vote. No, it was the people who rose up and the people stepped in. And the government of the time, the political status quo, did not wake up one day and say, let's desegregate the American South. That's not what happened. With the civil rights movement, the people stepped in, the people rose up, and the people stepped in. In 1776, we repudiated an aristocratic situation. We rejected a system that said only a few people get to thrive. We need to repudiate it again. And it is time for us to realize how unbelievably naive it is for us to think that anybody from the conventional political establishment, the status quo is not going to repair itself, ladies and gentlemen. It's not that they're not nice people, but the system is so corrupt. It is naive of us to think the status quo is going to repair itself. I'm running for president because it's time, this time in our generation, for the people to serve.
So, put one up here. We're gonna make it happen how we make it happen. Yeah, we can stand up. I just don't want to. I'm a back. So, we're very happy to have Marianne here. I think this was she just gave us a great insight. You guys wrote down a couple of questions. Current members of New Georgia Project also wrote down questions from Marianne Williamson. We're going to give her an opportunity to answer some of these questions. And I'll start with my personal favorite, and I'm just going to take personal privilege with this one, and it's criminal justice reform. Recent articles came out that that the sixth largest killer of African American men in America are the police department. How do you plan to keep black people from being killed while unarmed? Unarmed.
The first issue has to do with who you appoint as your Attorney General. Because the Attorney General, the consciousness of the Attorney General determines how that department operates. We now have a criminal justice department, someone like William Barr. I assure you, William Barr does not spend his time worrying about what you just asked about. So it has a lot to do with who your Attorney General is and all the appointments that are made underneath that. There is in criminal justice, including in police, there are some very enlightened thinkers, very progressive thinkers within our police departments and within our criminal justice system. But even within our police departments, what we have are thousands of different police departments, right? And that's the issue. So there are, I did a town hall in Detroit with the former police chief of Detroit, who is now the chief of police of the Detroit schools, Ralph Godby, who has been a real mentor of mine, and it made me understand a lot that goes on starting very, very early. First of all, I think that most people do not understand, have not really thought deeply about the level of stress and panic that the average police person experiences on a daily basis. And most white people do not have any concept of the level of stress and panic that the average white person feels every time they see a police car or hear a police siren. And you put those two together, and you have a real, real dangerous group. One of the reasons, there are a lot of reasons why so many of these policemen have been acquitted. Some of them make you really wonder what's going on, that they could have been acquitted given the fact we all saw the tape.
Right.
But in others of them, you can, even though I wouldn't have voted that way as a juror, I do understand some of the defense position, which is that a level of panic set in. A level of panic set in, which you can kind of understand, because if a policeman shoots 20 times, obviously he's coming from something bigger. Do you see what I'm saying? We need serious, even among police, it goes beyond diversity training. It has to do with the level of mental health and counseling, a much more holistic perspective even among the police. We need everything. We need an integrative approach. We need a whole person approach to politics. So first of all, there are some very enlightened people, such as Mr. Godby. He himself is a black man, but I think there's some very progressive white thinkers within that system who kind of know what to do. It's one of the areas, is there are many areas in this country where we actually have people who know what to do, but they're underfunded, undersupported, and under-resourced. Now, in terms of then you move into the population of the people who are being shot. A lot of this has to do when we need to remember, for instance, I'll give you an example. Let's say there is a drug raid, and somebody's, Ralph was telling me, for instance, he would go to schools in Detroit, and he would ask little kids in elementary school, and he'd go in his police uniform, right? And he'd say, what do you think of the police? And these little kids would say, we hate the police, you took my daddy, you took my mommy. And talking about how he said he had personally experienced it, where he's had to go in, he's arrested somebody, took the parent, and he would say later, who's going to go check out the kids? And there was no one to check on the kids. So we have to, one of the issues of my campaign is we can't just address symptoms, we have to go to cause. We have to go to the deep level of trauma that too many people are experiencing, not only in their job, but even from the very, very earliest. Next thing we have to deal with, and every black person in this room knows it, but I think some white people might not. There was a Supreme Court decision that gave the police permission to stop people in quote unquote high crime neighborhoods that they don't have in other neighborhoods. So if a police car is driving through a wealthy white neighborhood, the policeman has to have a real good excuse to stop that car. In other neighborhoods, not so. These are the kinds of things, so that what you have is a permission for engagement. The situations where they shouldn't have, Sandra Bland would be an example. In certain neighborhoods, I don't even think they could have stopped a car, right? And then also what we have, and there is, I don't know what's going on in Georgia, but I know in California, there is a bill that has to do, because we've all had this experience. You're watching television, and you saw what happened somewhere in Italy, and you saw what happened somewhere in France, and you say, well, they took that person in without killing them. They took that, but why couldn't you shoot in the leg?
Right.
Why couldn't you shoot the ankle? So Americans like see this. Well, this has to do with when the police have volunteered to use lethal force. In some cases, I mean, there's nothing here that we don't already know. We've actually seen it on video. But it is multidimensional like all of this. And what we need are to bring the people in, as I said, it's not only on this topic, it's on every topic. Let the people who have the skills, who understand what the deeper issues are, bring them to the table of power. And that is what I would do.
All right.
Can I add something to what you said? Because I'm mom of police officer, and I just really want to reflect with what you're saying, because I love your approach. You're looking at the whole picture. And being mom of a sergeant here in Atlanta, who went through many different situations, I can attest that those police officers are under stress. But also, we don't hear about all those heroic actions of our police officers on the streets, saving people, saving lives. And I've been on some awards to see black, white, doesn't matter, they're saving people. So we have to be more compassionate about them. And I am totally with you about everything you say about inequality. But there is something there that we have to address: education in the poor neighborhoods. How to bring those kids that saw their parents away, being incarcerated. I mean, those are really big issues.
Something that you just said that I'm glad you mentioned that I left out. We need to bring back what couldn't have, which was community policing.
Yes.
And what has also happened, when I was a kid, we actually used the term peace officer. And what has happened, and see, the word intersectionality is really true, because everything connects to everything. One of the things that's happened is, like that song, Gotta Move These MTV. One of the ways defense contractors make so much money is they've got to have, first of all, there's actually an inherent, just like prison builders, there's a financial benefit to more people in prison. To defense contractors, there's financial benefit to more military conflict. Right. So one of the things they do is they say, oh, well, you're going to need this new version of the fighter plane. So what are we going to do with all this old equipment? Oh, we'll take it over to the local police, which is very, very bad for America, because police officers are not meant to be militarized. But we have more and more of a military sensibility, and people see it. So all of that is contributing. And of course, what that woman said about education, one of the main pillars of my campaign is a United States Department of Children and Youth. We have millions of American children living in poverty, and this is more than education.
Thank you for your response.
Thank you.
Good.
Thank you.
So what is the Department of Peace and the Secretary of Peace? And what's the budget?
Okay. Numbers. Let's talk. Okay. We now give $750 billion a year to our military. So once again, integrative. I'm really asking that you take all this in. Don't just hear the facts. Really take it in with all aspects of yourself, because that's what we've got to do. Okay? $750 billion to the military. Now, let's start with this. We now have a holistic, integrative approach to healing the body. You can't just take medicine, you have to cultivate health. You can't just prepare for war, you also have to wage peace. War is the absence of peace. Peace isn't the absence of war. Just like sickness is the absence of health. Health isn't the absence of sickness. Okay. $750 billion on the military. Now, I have great respect for the military. My father fought in World War II. This critique is not of the military. It's a critique of the political decisions. The military should have every dollar they say they need. There's no question about that. But what we're talking about is there are those who would argue that of the $750 billion we spend on the military every year, there are those who argue that anywhere from $1 to $300 billion has more to do with defense profits than it has to do with the military. Now, secondly, we fund our State Department, and the State Department is diplomacy and development and mediation. We fund the State Department at $40 billion. All right, now drill down deeper with me. Within the $40 billion we spend on the State Department, we spend $17 billion on the USAID, which is humanitarian assistance abroad. And then, in addition to that, within the State Department, we spend less than $1 billion on the peace building agencies. Now, first of all, I want you to be very clear what peace builders do, because peace building expertise and skill is every bit as sophisticated and takes as much courage in some of the places where these people are working as does military. The 4 factors of peace building, which when present are statistically proven to increase the incidence of peace and decrease the incidence of violence, are, and this is not going to surprise anybody, number 1, expanded economic opportunities for women. Number 2, expanded educational opportunities for children. Number 3, reduction of violence against women. And number 4, a reduction of unnecessary human suffering. For me, all public policy should be built around the core principle of doing domestically and internationally that which helps people thrive. That's where peace comes from. That's where prosperity comes from. Unleash the spirit. Let people live their dreams. Be who they can be.
Right.
Let them be creative. Let them be productive. But create their own peace and their own prosperity. It happens naturally.
Right.
We should see internationally large groups of desperate people as a national security risk.
Yeah.
Desperate people do desperate things.
Yeah.
Large groups of desperate people are more vulnerable to ideological capture by genuinely psychotic forces. What do you think's happened down at the southern border? These people are trying to escape the desperate conditions in Honduras, Guatemala, El Salvador, etc. Therefore, for me, make me president, and those who are the peace builders, including the head of the USAID, that should be a cabinet level position. So right now, this is how it works. The president has a national security agenda. And there are all these people who are walking around appearing very, very serious, you know. And they're very, very serious. And they're, you know, they have this veneer of sober leadership,
Yeah.
even though they let us into Iraq and they let us into Vietnam. But there's this veneer. And then all the peace builders are over on the side of the room, sitting there peripheral. That won't be true when there's a secretary, when there's a Department of Peace. They should be equal partners. For me, the head of the people who are the peace builders and the people who are giving humanitarian assistance are at the same table as the military, and we're all working together because it's a holistic thing.
So are you saying that you would spend how much money under the Department of Peace? How much are you looking to spend exactly?
Well, it's not about how much I'm spending exactly. There has been a suggestion that you start with 2% of your military budget. But the way I see it, remember, for me, what we need to do is a massive infusion of economic hope and opportunity into the life of the average American. One of the parts of that has to do with seeing where military spending can be diminished to begin with. In addition to that, however, I want to go in there, and a lot of this, when I talk about Department of Children and Department of Peace, a lot of this is not so much creating new things as it is coordinating things that already exist and funding things at a greater level. Now, I do want to point out, which I'm sure I don't need to point out to you, Marcus, whenever they want to give a $2 trillion tax cut in 2017 that went 83 cents of every dollar went to the very richest people and corporations, we weren't really allowed to ask too much about how they were going to pay for it. And when they want to invade a country that didn't even do anything to us, we weren't allowed to ask how we're going to pay for it. You need to remember, we need to shift from a dirty economy to a clean economy, and we need to shift from a war economy to a peace economy. Now, in shifting from a war economy, in both those cases, it's the same skill sets, just transition. So when we talk about investing in peace, somebody might say, and that's where those questions come from, the corporate profiteers say, well, where's the money to be made, short-term profits for corporations? No, there are no short-term corporate profits. There is simply the possibility the planet and the people upon it might survive.
Yes.
You stop those corporate subsidies to the, now you put back in the middle class tax cut. You repeal that $2 trillion tax cut. You put back in the middle class tax cut. You stop those corporate subsidies. Do you realize last year alone we paid $26 billion in corporate subsidies to oil and gas? Then the United States government negotiated away, gave away its own capacity, its own ability to negotiate with big pharmaceutical companies to lower drug prices. That ends day one. And then, right? And then you also do the military retirement. Then you say to the billionaires among us, we're very happy you made $1 billion. We would like 3% on your assets.
Yeah.
And then we say to those who made $50 million a year, we're also very happy for you. We would like 2% on your assets, right? Because wealthy people, there is such thing as good wealthy commerce in America. The problem isn't that some people got really rich. The problem is not enough people get a chance to. And the average person does not want to feel that their ability to make money is at the expense of somebody else's. So, you do all the things I just said, guess what we're going to have? Cash on hand. You will have some real money once we do the things I just said. And one of the things we're going to do with it is the United States Department.
Nice. So, in the state, if folks want to try something bad out or evil to the populace, they like to try it out in Georgia first.
Well, clearly that happened. And the great work of you and NGP.
Oh, thank you. Appreciate it. Yeah. So this year's, one of this year's things that happened was the Georgia heartbeat bill, where the Republican state legislature decided that they were going to allow women to have an abortion after 6 weeks. When we know that most women don't even know they're pregnant until after 6 weeks. So as president, what would you do to stop laws like this from happening and an environment of laws like this from happening here in the state of Georgia and across the nation?
So the American people, most Americans need to read one of those like American History for Dummies books. We all need a little bit of brushing up on our civics. The American president does not have a magic wand, which right now, thank God. So we need to be clear where the power lies. The people who are passing laws like that know that they're unconstitutional, but they're doing it for a reason. They're doing it because it's a very strategized effort to get to the point where they will be able to bring Roe v. Wade to the Supreme Court. And then these are called trigger laws. So do you know the trigger law concept? Trigger laws, for instance, that would be an example. They know it's unconstitutional, but they're getting it in place because the moment Roe v. Wade is overturned, then it'll be passed within 24 hours. Now, if we're honest with ourselves, and we need to be, it could go either way. Because we now have, and say this to your friends who either didn't vote or voted for Jill Stein, who didn't think that the issue of the Supreme Court was important. We now have, with the corporatist Supreme Court that we have, and the very good possibility that Donald Trump will have even another chance to appoint a Supreme Court justice. I think those women who are old enough in this room have a greater sense of how hard won that was. A lot of younger people might have taken it for granted, not realizing that the fact you have a right doesn't mean it can't be taken away. It could go either way. But what we need to do is on the level of legislation, do everything possible to block such laws as that. And I can promise you as president, and I also believe this is true of any of the women who are running, and I hope the men who are running as well, to do everything possible federally through federal legislation to bolster the right of Roe v. Wade and to block this attack on women. Now, let me say something about that. I do believe that abortion is a moral issue. I do. But I believe that it is a private moral issue. And I do not believe the U.S. government has any right. It's not the right of the U.S. government to legislate private morals. I trust the moral decision-making of the American woman to make the decisions which are the moral ones for her life and her own biological decisions. And I also say this to you. These attacks, what you just said, is not just an attack on reproductive rights, and it is not just an attack on women's health care. It is an attack on the full empowerment of women.
It is.
And I'm on it.
You're on it. The official answer is she's on it. All right, so one of the big issues that happened in the state of Georgia, and we were talking about this earlier, is the amount of purged voters from our voter rolls. And as president of our dear United States of America, what are you going to do to protect democracy?
So this is what happened. 1965. Once again, the older person. Here, kids, this is what happened. You weren't here, but we were. Okay, in 1965, the United States Congress passed the Voting Rights Act. And the Voting Rights Act ensured equal access to blacks for voting. And of course, that equality ensured is also blessed many minorities, etc. Now, 2013, this is the corporatist agenda. We've gotten hold of the Supreme Court. 2013, the John Roberts-led Supreme Court started chipping away at the Voting Rights Act. And I want to tell you something that happened with Ruth Bader Ginsburg in her dissent. John Roberts said, oh, we don't need the Voting Rights Act anymore. The South is different, blah, blah, blah. Ruth Bader Ginsburg in her dissent said, wait, let me understand this. She said, what you're saying is, there's been a rainstorm. We have had an umbrella that worked. You're saying, we're not getting wet, we don't need an umbrella anymore. She said, no, you take down the umbrella, it's gonna rain. And what she said is true. This is why the Supreme Court decisions are so important. As soon as they started chipping away at the Voting Rights Act, all these voter suppression efforts began. None of this, you might wonder, why didn't we hear about this 10 years ago? Because 10 years ago, the Voting Rights Act was still in place. As soon as they started chipping away at it, and this is all part of the corporatist agenda, it's all part of the aristocratic paradigm. It is anti-democracy. It is really the idea that a few people should have the power. A few people should have the opportunity. Make it as difficult as we can for what they view as the riffraff and what we view the people of the United States. Now, as I said before about criminal justice, one of the most important appointments for the president is the Attorney General. And for me, the appointment of the Attorney General, the focus, the three most important things for me are, number one, racial disparity in criminal justice, both in sentencing, police engagement, etc. Number two, white-collar crime. And number three, voter suppression. You need, right now, the U.S. government is on the side of the bad guys. And you need a U.S. government that is I would not be timid with executive power.
All right.
So on the same topic of positions within your cabinet,
Yes.
President Marianne Williamson and her vice president is...
Okay. My feeling is that my vice presidential should be, because I have not had experience in Washington, I believe that the best candidate would be a senator. Someone who has had experience in Washington. That's the perfect sort of yin and yang.
Right.
Franklin Roosevelt said that the primary responsibility of the presidency is moral leadership, that the administrative aspect is secondary. But I think I should have a vice president who is well-versed in how the Congress works. Because my job is to execute, right? So we got to execute it. And somebody who has well-known, well-established, not just cred, but expertise and understanding and experience in how Congress operates and how Washington operates, I think would be a very important partner for me.
You mentioned
Bernison.
you mentioned Attorney General a couple
Yes.
of times. Anybody in mind for your Attorney General position?
No, but it would be a very progressive prosecutor. I can tell you that. It would be a very progressive left-wing Attorney General. It
Okay.
would not be a middle-of-the-road person.
All right, we're gonna go for we're gonna have two more questions, and then we're gonna get an opportunity to take some pictures with her. This is Pride Weekend in Atlanta, Georgia, this weekend, and in the spirit of Pride Weekend, as President of the United States, would you support the ERA?
I don't know. What do you think? Well, New Jersey, we're hoping on New Jersey. We got that one state we need, right? Yeah, I sure would.
Immediately, huh?
Yes.
Okay, all right. And the last question before we let you get out here with everyone and take a couple of pictures is, what is your plan for combating the opioid crisis here in the state of Georgia and across America?
Two issues are significant. One, of course, is that attorneys general across the country are now indicting big pharmaceutical executives, who we now know have knowingly over-manufactured, over-marketed, and led to the over-prescription of opioids. First thing we need to do is stop that. There's already an effort to stop it, but still, anybody who has an American life, I don't care what they tell you, anybody here knows how easy it is. You could find somebody within 2 or 3 phone calls who could get you any psychopharmacological, anything you want. So, you know, and I've been saying for years that the biggest drug dealer in America are legal drug manufacturers. So this was purposely created for corporate greed. That's what happened here. Do painkillers have a place? Yeah, they have a place for people who are in serious pain. And so we know what happened there. So we know the things on the level of symptom that needs to be done. We know about the communities that need more money for rehabs. We need communities that we need to turn it into not a criminal issue, but a public health issue. We know that we need to legalize marijuana. We know we need to let people who are in prison for marijuana-related sentences out quickly. We know that we need to do tax incentives and actually other kinds of ways to actually support their being able to get back into the workplace. We need to scrap the box, etc. But the most important thing we need to do is stop allowing so many children to grow up in such desperate circumstances that it makes all the sense in the world. They'll do whatever they can to get out of their pain. That's what we need to do. And I said that in states like New Hampshire, that it's hard to say, you're going to treat the opioid price over here, but you have got 25% of all children in northern New Hampshire going to sleep hungry at night. As long as people are in enough pain, they're going to look for a way to get out of the pain.
Right.
Yeah. Treat people's pain. And that's why what I need, go to the cause, not just the symptoms.
That's right.
Go to the cause. That's why all public policy should be based on what will help people thrive. I went in the last couple of days, I went in South Carolina, the Governor's School of Arts and Humanities. I've also been, that's in Greenville, in Hartsville, they have the Governor's School of Technology and Science and Math. It's shocking to me, in South Carolina they have $1 billion surplus and yet the governor denied Medicaid expansion. I don't understand it. It's the consciousness, it's the morals here. But they have these amazing schools. And these schools are both, and they're public schools, and they are palaces. And that's what every American school should be, a palace of learning and culture and the arts. And that's what I want every school in America to be, regardless of what And those schools are both inspiring, deeply inspiring. They're just palaces. They're deeply inspiring and they're heartbreaking because of how many children are not privy to them. I'll tell you something. You have more American children who grow up with the kind of opportunities to experience the fullness of their potential. When you have enough light in the room, the darkness can't get in. That's what we need.
So everyone give it up for Marianne Williamson.